The nine-sided circle, for those who would rather be awake than entertained.
Well, here we are. I'm not sure how this is going to be working. Hopefully well. I am, as you can see from the background, in a completely different place than I was this time last week. And I am hoping that all does well, and that this pulls off. It's kind of a shakedown cruise, as it were. So, like I said, as you can see, I am in a different place on the next phase of my walkabout, and a good 80 miles from where I was before. I'm going to see if I can adjust this light, because all of a sudden it's a little on the bright side. There, that's better. So, hello, Laura. And everybody give me a quick check and let me know that you are seeing and hearing this in a way that is working for you. Good. That's all good and well. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about a topic that you may find of interest. There was a phrase that was bandied about by Mr. Gurdjieff and his students back in the day, and that was conscious suffering. Now, during that time, most of his students did not seem to understand what he was talking about, even though he tried to explain it many different ways and many different times. Maybe his English was just not good enough, or his Russian was just not good enough. But there seemed to be a lot of misunderstanding. The idea that you had to somehow go out and make these super efforts and suffer really, really hard for what you were doing. And that's not what he meant. So, the original meaning of the word suffer comes from let me pull it up real quick here. I have my notes. Yes, comes from the 13th century French, Middle French, and it means to allow or occur or continue, to permit, to tolerate, to fail to prevent or suppress. Now that is different than what we usually understand suffering to mean these days, which has to do with the endurance of pain. And that's a completely different thing. If you hear some strange panting sounds behind me, it's the dog. He's very interested in what we're doing. He's a very sweet dog. So, conscious suffering, the best way to explain it is to consciously allow everything to be as it already is. This is a phrase that I'm just blatantly stealing from a guy by the name of Adyashanti, who was the first person I heard to use that phrase, and I thought, yeah, that's what we're talking about. Let me repeat that. Conscious suffering is to consciously and with full will and intention allow everything to be as it already is. And hello, Ian. So, allowing everything to be as it already is likely to be one of the hardest things that you have ever done. Does that make sense? Because most of us don't want everything to be as it already is. We want it to be different. We want it to be what we want it to be, not what it is. Or we want it to not be what it is, or any of these things. Not working here. Not sure what that means. So, how does one do this? How does one allow everything to be as it already is? Look around. Look inside. And basically just take a breath and accept. Now, there's more to it than that, but that's the basic process. So, conscious suffering means to allow everything to be as it already is, and to work within that milieu, not trying to change what is, because that's not conscious suffering, but to work within what is, and changes will emerge organically, and they will emerge because of three things that you have, which you may or may not be using. And this gets to the other part of the title, which is intentional work, conscious suffering and intentional work. A human being basically owns three things within themselves, and this is pretty much the only thing that you really possess. Those are your attention, your intention, and your presence. This follows the law of threefoldness that those of you who have been in the Enneagram class have heard me talk about, the law of three. Attention is related to the affirming force. Intention is related to the denying force, believe it or not. And presence is related to the reconciling force. So, all three of these operate simultaneously, not one after the other, though they may manifest one after the other. Where your attention goes, you follow. Where your intention is, you can actually work. There is no real work without intention, and there is no real work without attention or presence. So if you want intentional work, then you have to have all three of these things active. So what does conscious suffering actually grant us, Nick asks? It grants us reality. If you are not in a state of conscious suffering, you are not in reality. You are not even remotely connected to reality. You're connected to what you are resisting. You're connected to what you are wanting. You're connected to what you are not wanting. You are connected to the future. You're connected to the past. You're connected to all of these things, but you are not connected to the presence unless you are allowing everything to be as it already is. I hope that makes sense. Good, I see a little thumbs up going up. So, in order to be in a state of conscious suffering, to allow everything to be as it already is, then you must bring these three forces within yourself into play. First, where is your attention? Is your attention lost in the past or the future? Is it lost in emotion or feeling? Is it diving inward? Is it completely outward? Are you scanning the world for dangerous things that you think might happen? Any of that kind of stuff. You find your intention and you bring your attention to heal, and you put your attention on what is. And this begins, and Nick and I will one day in the not too distant future be talking about this to you together in a special series that we are going to do. This is where we begin to do what is called in the West a phenomenological reduction. We experience the present as it is without presupposition, without any attempt to change it, just with the intention to observe. And that's the second part. You bring your attention to the present. Your intention is just to witness. And your presence is fully brought into that witnessing without being identified with what is being witnessed. That is the basis of conscious work. Does that make sense? Are you following me? That is absolutely correct. Nick asks, so if one's attention is in fantasy, like in a desire, then one is not consciously suffering. Yes. I mean, somebody could make an argument that, oh, that desire should also be allowed. Maybe so, but you do not get to be lost in it. You get to notice it if it's there, because it already is. But usually a desire is a projection into the future. So, I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to say this probably 100 times during this talk. Allowing everything to be as it already is. And that's a lot of work. The thumps that you hear around are the cats playing with the dog. The cats are in love with the dog. And they like to thump about. It's getting dark in here. Hang on one second. Let me try something to see if this gets better. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. So, Sean Bryan asks, at what stage of development is it appropriate to begin this training? The answer is now. It is the now stage. If you are listening to this, then it is appropriate for you to begin this training. If you're not listening to this, then it is no longer appropriate. So, there you go. It's a puppy. Yes, there is a puppy. Back there, behind me. A puppy. And a Cape Buffalo skull. Strange things in this house. So, the attention, intention, presence. Do you remember back when you were a kid in elementary school and the fire marshal came and he taught you about the fire triangle? I may be dating myself here, but the fire triangle was a thing when I was a kid. And that was a way that all of us kids could understand how fires worked, what started them, and what were the conditions in which a fire could start. And there were three things that a fire needed. in order to start. It needed heat, it needed a fuel source, and it needed oxygen. And you remove any one of those things, you don't get a fire. All three had to be present at the same time. The attention, intention, presence triangle is like the fire triangle. For you to be awake in the world, all three of those have to be present at the same time. If you remove one of them, you are no longer a conscious human being. All three of these need to suffuse your thought and your movement. When you're walking down the street, all three of these should be in play. When you are doing anything, all three of these should be in play. Oh, Kyle, I do not know what I would do without you doing that typing for me, because everybody knows that I can't type and talk at the same time. I would literally trip over my own fingers. There would be a crash and everything would fall apart. You have to understand, Nick, that 9 is not a goal, it's an outcome, which is different. A goal is a thing that is sitting somewhere in space-time, literally. An outcome is the ending of a process, and that's a slightly different thing. So, intention starts processes working. There are unconscious processes and there are conscious processes. You do not get a conscious process without intention. And as I mentioned, for those of you who remember the Enneagram workshop, intention completed, an intention that gets to its outcome, gives you energy. An intention that does not go to its outcome because of a loss of that intention somewhere in the middle of the process, or a loss of awareness, or a loss of presence, ends up taking energy from you. Cats everywhere. So hopefully this is making sense. And hopefully the pictures are still getting through. I think we're actually going to be putting a new internet connection in this house in the next week, so that we have more throughput and I can talk to y'all more better. No, the process does not maintain itself. The process is not a closed system. The process will only continue when at certain very specific points it is given energy from the outside. Just as the process of living will only continue in your body if you occasionally feed it and give it oxygen. That's the analogy that Gurdjieff used, the idea of first and second digestion. So, no process maintains itself without help from outside the process. Your attention must be functioning so that you know when you need that help, and you can see where the help will be coming from. And so, it goes back to, How can you know when the help will be needed? You must allow everything to be as it already is and be aware, have your awareness on that which is, so that you can experience the moment when the process shifts, whatever that process is, and requires that little jump in energy. And you will remember that we were talking about, yes, they are the will and grace points, the two shock points, the mi-fa and the si-do intervals on the octave that we were discussing. So how are we doing with all of this? This is fairly obtuse in some ways, though I think that it is timely in that we all are in the position of having the opportunity to allow things to be as they already are. And that's harder and harder to do because the world is oftentimes exhibiting reflections of insanity because of crazy human beings, for the most part. Okay, we got all of that. Good. So, in all of this, the first step to allowing everything to be as it already is, stay in your breath. The practice of presence is much, much easier when you let yourself stay in your breath. As a matter of fact, there are 3 parts to this. The first part, awareness of breath. As you're sitting there, notice that you're breathing. If you're not breathing, then something could be wrong. So let's hope everybody who's listening to this is breathing. So you have awareness of breath. You also have awareness of your external environment. So breath is awareness of body. There's awareness of your internal environment, and you will have that with each of your senses, your sight, your hearing, your smell, your taste, your touch are all giving you information. Proprioception is giving you information. There is no time that you are not aware of where the exact center of the earth is. Did you know that? That's kind of weird and cool. And then you have awareness of breath, awareness of your environment. That is your referential awareness. And then you have your reflexive awareness, which is your awareness of your awareness. Awareness turns on itself, and you hold all 3 of these at the same time. Awareness of breath, awareness of the environment, and awareness of your awareness. At first, it will be really, really hard to do this. You'll be able to do it for a second or 2 seconds. And then with a little practice, you'll be able to do it for longer. With a lot of practice, you'll be able to do it for longer still. When you can do this for minutes at a time, you have made significant advancement. So, awareness of breath, awareness of environment, awareness of being is another way to say awareness of awareness, and allowing everything to be as it already is. That's what you plug these 3 things into. Nick asks, when an outcome is thwarted, God, I love that word. We don't use that word enough. Does this mean that the outcome was out of accordance with reality? No. It does not mean that. It means that's what happened. When an outcome is thwarted, it means that an outcome is thwarted. And it doesn't mean anything other than that. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything right. All you did was run into something that you could not overcome. And that will happen. Nobody in this world gets all of their outcomes that they're looking for. Not every intention makes it all the way to the end. Hazard steps in and occasionally knocks an intention for a loop. Yes, indeed, a major dose of reality. And that goes to the saying that I put up last week, that when you are alone and lost in the wilderness and praying to God for safety, remember that God must also answer the lion's prayers. That little saying, which is an old Sufi saying, managed to upset a lot of people, which I found very amusing. So, conscious suffering, allowing everything to be as it already is. Allow the little universe to come unto me. That's rather irreverent of me. What you gonna do? So, allowing everything to be as it already is. Having your attention focused on what is, and breaking your attention into 3 parts, one of which is on your breath, one of which is on your external environment, and one of which is on your own being. And Nick asked, did the lion quote upset people because they wanted to be special to God? And the answer is a definitive yes. So, when you have everything in alignment and you are allowing things to be as they already are, your attention is open. It's called an open intention. And I'm going to talk about a practice that I'm going to teach, but I'm not going to teach this practice publicly. It is only going to be for the select and chosen few. Because it's not something that I want to put out to the world in general, and I'm not going to teach it on this. It's going to be taught in a special webinar, and people will be invited to it. And it is it's called the void practice, and it is a practice of perceiving in a completely different way than we're used to. So, allowing everything to be as it already is, awareness on breath, awareness on the environment, awareness on awareness, and intending that process which is appropriate to the moment. That may be intending to walk, intending to make dinner, and allowing that intention to bring you to the kitchen and pull the food out. It can be anything like that. So, here we are. And where is your presence? Where is your attention? What is your intention? What are you not at this moment allowing to be as it already is? And is your refusal to let something not be as it already is getting in your way? The answer is, of course, yes. Can I expound more upon presence? Unfortunately, not really, because it's one of these things that we don't have proper language for. It's like pornography. You know it when you see it. So, the way to understand it that I know of is to ask yourself right now, are you present or are you absent? Are you present here? Are you present with me in this conversation? Are you present in the room that you are in? And you will check, and the answer will be yes in that moment. That's how you begin to find your present. How are presence and attention different? Presence is generalized and diffuse and passive. Attention is focused and active. Your attention moves outward from you. Your attention is an active force, not a passive force. Your presence is a passive force. It is the witness to all of this. And it, in fact, doesn't do anything but witness. Which is why you need all of the other parts of you. Does that make sense? And intention is even more active than attention is. But while attention is the active force, intention is literally the denying force. Because intention denies the infinity of the possible for the specific. At this moment, I could do 100,000 things, as the Taoists say. And out of that 100,000 things, my intention will choose one for me to do. And that means I deny all the rest of them. Which is how it works in this case. So, attention is active in a affirmative sense, and intention is active in the denying sense. I would say that all three of them support each other, Nick. Nick asks, would you say that intention supports, presence supports attention? They are literally like the fire triangle. If you remove any one of the three, it all goes away. Your awakeness is gone. In order for you to be awake in the world, all three of these must be simultaneously active. And that's represented in how you have your three attentions, which is the exercise that I described of attention on breath, attention on environment, attention on presence. That it isn't really three different attentions, but it's called that because you don't have a better term for it. But you actually can't do three different attentions, you can make your attention broad enough to attend to these three things simultaneously. Can you describe some scenarios in which one is absent? Yeah, most of life. For most people, most of the time. Dude, you're on Facebook. All three of them are absent most of the time for the people who are posting most of their stuff on Facebook. It is an unconscious and mechanical thing. Go to any political rally, whether it is a politic that you like or a politic that you don't like, and you will see exactly this. Go to any religious service, and you will see exactly this. Does training allow attention to broaden? Yes. One of the major facets of the training, of the teaching, is specifically how to broaden your attention and how to change it in such a way that it serves you at any given moment. Dave, you hit the nail right on the head. Dave says, or asks, as you allow, with tripod intact, the universe giveth unto thee more complex and difficult things to allow. Yes, very, very often. I am constantly reminded in my own life of something that Mother Teresa said. She said, I know that God will never give me anything that I can't handle, but there are some times where I wish He didn't have such faith in me. And so, yes, the more you can do, the more you are required to do. And this, in my experience so far, never stops being true. There is no time where you don't have something to push against, because you don't grow without resistance. You get that, right? You do not grow without something that you have to push against. If you want to grow bigger muscles, you lift weight. Lifting weight is forcing your muscles to operate against resistance. If you want to have better cardio, you go out and you do cardio exercises so that your heart learns to work against greater resistance. The resistance in that case is your oxygen debt. You have to learn to become more efficient. Necessary friction indeed. And with great power, etc. Yes, Spider-Man was right. Or Spider-Man's uncle, Ben, was right. Yes, all of these things. Iron does sharpen iron. And any of you who do any kind of serious martial arts will know that you can do all the forms in the world, but they don't mean anything until you work against a fully uncooperative opponent. Because only that gives you the feedback that you need to actually sharpen your form. And that only happens when you have the three elements in their proper place, and you are allowing everything to be as it already is. There is nothing worse in a martial context than not allowing everything to be as it already is. Because if you don't, you will get hit a lot. And so, and there's Amber. Hello, Amber. I'm seeing old friends popping in on this, and that's always a good thing. Swimming only works with water. Swimming also works with Karo syrup, but not nearly as good. But I take your meaning, yes. Bruce Lee said something about that. He said, if you want to learn to swim, you have to get wet. So, this is most apparent in sports where you are contesting against somebody else. If you are working a sport that is not necessarily against somebody else, for instance, if you are running, you're not necessarily racing, but you are running against your own inability to allow things to be as they already are. When you're out there and your muscles are beginning to get a little tired and you've created a little oxygen debt for yourself and your glycogen is dropped and you haven't kicked over to fat burning yet, and I'm talking about distance running at this point because that's what I do and so that's what I know. Then you have, if you want to complete the distance that you have intended for yourself, you have to allow everything to be as it already is. You cannot resist it. If you resist it, you stop. You fail. Because your mind will grasp onto anything to get you to stop doing what you're doing because it hurts. So, even in sports that do not contend against someone else, you have this going. It is easier to see when you are contending against a fully resistant opponent. And for me, it works best when it's a martial contest. That's why I love fencing so much, is because it's all about getting out on the list with somebody who has no intention of letting you touch them with your sword and has every intention of touching you. Yes, Ian, that is exactly correct. So, here we are. If I am in a fencing match, and the first thing that I do is I make sure that I'm out of my opponent's measure. It means he cannot easily reach me with his sword without taking a step or two forward. And I make sure that I am allowing everything to be as it already is. I'm not doing any of the weird mind games that somebody can do in a case like that. My attention is on those three things that I mentioned: on the environment, on my breath, on my own awareness. Making sure that all of those are focused in the present and all of those are allowing everything to be as it is, so that when something changes, I am ready to respond to it spontaneously without having to, one, plan what I'm going to do, because there ain't time. The tip of the sword travels really, really fast. You do not have time to think it out. Your response must be from that place of flow. Yes, Nick, though I would say that conscious suffering, rather than allow us to embrace resistance, allows us to not create resistance in the first place. Resistance is created by trying to not allow everything to be as it already is. When it gets right down to it, that's what creates resistance. And that's what creates pain as opposed to suffering. No resistance, no pain. Lots of suffering. There we go. So we've got about 15 minutes before we have to wrap it up. Any questions? If you don't have any questions, I'm going to be telling you things for the next 15 minutes. So if I do, it's on you. Waiting patiently, hoping for a question. Hoping for a question from somebody who hasn't asked a question. This 10-second lag is definitely, it makes it hard for me to sometimes ask the questions. Kyle says, suffering plus resistance equals pain. Kinda. What is plus resistance equals pain. So, resistance is the opposite of suffering. So you can choose to create resistance. That is your intentional work. So that you can grow. And that's a slightly different kind of resistance that we're talking about here. Working against resistance, but not creating resistance within yourself. Anytime that you created an intention, there will be resistance. It is one of the immutable laws of the universe. Newton figured this out. And this is the law of inertia. Objects in motion will want to remain in motion. Objects at rest will tend to remain at rest. So, when you take a state from a state of rest to a state of motion, there will be resistance from that state because it doesn't want to change states. It's the nature of it. And this is metaphor, not physics, even though it sounds like physics. All right. Let me tell you a few things that are up. While I am in this place, and before I go to the next point on my journey, I am working on putting together a formal curriculum for those who are interested. And it's going to be basically open. And there will be more about it in the near future. I'm going to be doing some private talks to the group of you. Pretty much anybody who tunes into this is going to be invited to them. So if you're listening to this, whether it is live or in replay, then you can assume that if you want one, you will have an invitation to the private material that I'm going to be putting out there, which will be a series of practices from the school that are the basic. When I say the school, I'm talking about the school with a capital S. Oh, Sean, you asked me a question that will take me an hour to answer, and I only have 10 minutes. So hold that thought, and we will jump into it at a later date. I'm actually going to write that down. This is me with my pen going for my paper so that I can write this down because I don't want to forget it. Paper, paper, pen. It's an important question. Okay, that's taken care of. This is going to be in way of an experiment, and you guys are like my beta testers. Because, frankly, I have no idea what the heck I'm doing. I mean, nobody's done this before. I'm trying to teach things to a group of you who are not sitting in front of me from material that has always been taught directly, person to person. And it is a new and interesting experiment. And as I've told you guys before, other attempts have turned out less than they could have been, but the technology is so different now than when I first received the assignment to see what I could do for teaching on the internet, that I think it's now possible. Because we can do this stuff in real time, we can control who is here, we can control the material, and it's kind of groovy. And I'm thinking that I may have come up with an excellent idea on how to do this. And I want you all to be beta testers for this. And so later on, I'm going to put out the word, and I'm going to want to hear in private message from each of you who is interested in participating, and then invitations will be sent out. Are you intrigued? I'm trying to be intriguing here. And I'm out of practice with intriguing, so tell me how I'm doing. Yep. I'm also going to create some methods by which those of you who have interest can do some more intensive work. And that will be announced in probably in next Sunday's talk. I will have that all set up. Because I think the time has come. As a matter of fact, I know the time has come. All of the signs and portents say that the time has come. Yeah, it's even the time has come, the walrus said, to talk of many things, of ships and shoes and sealing wax and cabbages and kings. For those of you who don't know your Lewis Carroll, you should know your Lewis Carroll. So, in the last 5 minutes, are there any more questions? If there are no questions, are there any answers? If you have any answers, I will give you full and detailed questions for them. And anybody who says 42 is outmoded. And I should warn you that any moment there is going to probably be some crashing sound and somebody coming through the door on my right. And so don't mind that. It will just be one of the house people coming through just in time. The stars are in fact right. The answer is pizza. And the question is, what food is most likely to have been created by space aliens? Yes, they can be viewed as a spectrum, and they can be viewed as a field, where attention and intention represents the poles, and presence represents the field phenomena itself, the field between the poles. All right, folks. Well, we're going to wrap it up for tonight. And I will be talking to you all again next Sunday. I hope that you enjoyed yourself. Looking for some groovy feedback. And we will talk to you then. So, without further ado, take care, and we'll see you next week.